On the line with us is Candice Bernd, the staff reporter at truthout.org. Candice, B-E-R-N-D, is her Twitter handle and her name. Candice, welcome to the program.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Am I pronouncing your name right?
Yeah, that's right.
Great. So I've been wondering, ever since this so-called First Step Act, the criminal justice reform, when I learned that Jared Kushner was pushing this thing, and his dad, of course, went to prison for financial fraud, and he may face the same himself, and the Koch brothers were promoting it, and they had been previously promoting the whole mens rea thing that would make it much, much harder to throw white-collar criminals in jail. I've been very suspicious, and you did some really good reporting on this. I wonder, please tell us what's the real story here with this so-called criminal justice reform?
Right, exactly. That kind of skepticism, I think, is always warranted when you have players like Koch's Mark Holden and Jared Kushner so closely involved in shaping something like this. But before I get into, the sort of caution that a lot of my reporting was about, I do want to just take a second to say that this act that got passed and signed does do some really good things. And I think we have to weigh that against the benefits. Some really important sentencing reductions got passed in this law that I think are really significant. I think what critics are pointing out, though, is that it's such a narrow slice of people that are going to see these benefits. When we talk about, this being sort of the largest blow against mandatory minimums since the 2010 Fair Sentencing Act, we can look at that act being retroactive and see that it's only going to affect about 2,600 people. This whole bill only affects the federal prison system, which is really only about 13% of the entire, 2.1 million incarcerated population. So, this is a fraction of folks that are going to see the benefits of this. And like you said, with the risk assessment regime that this act is setting up, a lot of the people who are going to be eligible for these programs are people who are going to be deemed low risk. And that means really well-resourced, often white folks, white men.
Affluent,
right, who went in on these white-collar crimes, which is, that's the kind of regime that Jared Kushner and Mark Holden have set up here with this bill. It will definitely, it's definitely going to help out some folks, some more marginalized folks, but I think that a lot of really well-resourced white-collar crime folks are going to end up being more eligible. And what critics of this bill are much more concerned about, what they think outweighs the sort of benefits that we're getting from these sentencing reductions overall, is coupled with that risk assessment regime and how it sets up an electronic monitoring system. They're really, really concerned about these ankle monitors or this electronic surveillance aspect of this bill. It sets up CoreCivic, formerly known as Corrections Corporation of America, and GEO Group, another, the second largest private prison corporation. It sets them up to make a lot of money coming in for these reentry services that are going to be set up. And then also these ankle monitors, they're going to be profiting a lot off of these ankle monitors.
So do I have this right? Basically, the law says that, particularly with these white-collar criminals, you can let them out of jail early, not to worry. But when you do, you've got to put them in the hands of a privatized, for-profit system of keeping track of them and protecting us from them or whatever, with the ankle bracelets and all this kind of stuff. And that, in and of itself, is going to be a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Right. That's exactly right. And I think with the white collar folks, the folks who end up being deemed the most low risk, a lot of those folks may not even end up on monitors. They may just be eligible for just early release on their own. And a lot of the more marginalized folks are the folks that are going to end up with supervised sort of surveillance state release. You can get out, but you have to agree to this monitor, which, we have already seen that with the monitors, people have paid up to $35 a day for their own monitor. There's nothing in this bill that prevents these corporations from charging people a fee for their own monitoring devices. That's incredibly dangerous. And then when we talk about post-prison services, reentry halfway houses, those are the very sources of this private prison industry that these corporations are moving into, and they're moving into those areas very, very heavily this year. In particular, they did a lot of research to buy up halfway houses and things like that. So this bill in particular authorizes a $375 million post-prison services sort of expansion, and that's what many critics are sort of deeming the treatment industrial complex, if you will. So that's why CoreCivic and Geo Group, along with the Koch brothers and Jared Kushner, backed this bill so heavily. In fact, they said
they're all going to make money on it. I'm sorry.
Do not adjourn without passing this bill was sort of their line.
Right. And so, geez, this is so sad to hear, because, you know, there was all this optimistic, happy talk on TV and radio about how, oh, we're finally going to, you know, undo some of the damage that was done by the frankly racist policies. You know, George Herbert Walker Bush, you know, buying cocaine across the street from the White House, setting that kid up, and you know, the disparate sentencing and all this. You know, everybody knows the horror stories of minimum mandatory, and you know, let's fix some of this. And it turns out, you know, a few thousand people, mostly affluent white-collar criminals, are going to benefit from this law. It doesn't affect state prisons or state laws at all, and it's creating a whole brand new multi-billion-dollar industry within the correction system. Does this mean?
Right. And
go ahead.
Right. And I think it's interesting you brought up HW there. You know, look at who is the incoming Attorney General, William Barr. He oversaw the Bureau of Prisons during the war on drugs that set up all of these casualties of those war and funneled them into the incarceration system. And he's in charge of setting up now, or it's going to be the Attorney General that's in charge of these risk assessment, putting those systems in place. It's the risk assessments that sort of determine early release, supervised release, that kind of thing. So he's going to be overseeing this. And what critics are saying is that this has systematically sort of carved out those casualties of the war on drugs in particular in a very glaring way. You know, it does make that 2010 Fair Sentencing Act retroactive, but if they wanted to really include the casualties of the war on drugs, they would have made the Sentencing Reform Corrections Act retroactive if they really had wanted to include those folks. So yeah, it includes systematically those folks.
Yeah, remarkable. Do you see any way that we can actually have genuine criminal justice reform in this country, as opposed to just, you know, a Band-Aid with a $1 billion price tag?
Right. Well, you know, many people are rightfully saying, "Oh, this is just a first step." One of my sources called it's only a baby step, is what she said. But I think that with the dangers that this bill sets up with the electronic monitors, and you know, setting up these private corporations to profit, I think that most crucially, we really need to follow up and demand that accountability measures are put in place. First of all, I think there should have been some measure in this bill that said we can't have these kinds of public-private partnerships, and really did something to limit that in general.
Because this is the further privatization of our criminal justice system, essentially.
Right. So I think first off, we got to, because we're basically, it's a trade-off between the short-term relief for a very few a small slice, a fraction of the federal prison system, versus, you know, you got to think about what are communities going to look like in 20 years. You can imagine marginalized communities who are bogged down with these monitors that they have to pay for. And it's this kind of expansion of the prison outside the prison system and into folks' homes, marginalized people's homes.
Is this going to turn, Candice, is this going to turn into something where if under the old laws, somebody might have gotten, say, 5 years in jail, they get out after 3 years, you know, good behavior, and, you know, spend a year in a halfway house or 6 months or whatever, and then boom, they're done. And now, instead of 5 years, they're going to spend 2 years, let's say, in jail. But then they're going to spend the next 7 years with an ankle bracelet on, paying CoreCivic, you know, a fee every day. I mean, is it actually, if you include the monitored release, actually going to extend sentences?
Right. I'm not so sure about extending sentences as much as there's no incentive once we have this ankle monitor regime in place. And remember, already 200,000 people are already on ankle monitors. But once you have this of a more systematic regime in place for these ankle monitors, I think the concern is really that there's nothing that incentivizes reducing people from monitors. There's nothing that says we're not going to double the population that's on monitors.
Well, on the contrary, there's a huge incentive to increase that population because it's a profit center.
Right, exactly. I think that is the main concern, is that it's going to double this population of folks. You know, people may be getting out, but we're going to see this huge balloon in the population of people who are on electronic monitors, which, you know, it doesn't only, it's obviously there's the stigma that goes into it. But another thing that critics point out is that, you know, it turns your house into a jail for one thing, but it also turns your family, if you're staying with family, into your jailers, and they have to suffer the repercussions as well, because they are subject, if someone with an ankle monitor is staying with a relative, those relatives are subject to searches and seizures within their home at any time.
Oh, amazing. Candice, I'm sorry, we're out of time, but Candice Bernd, her piece, Trump's Sinister First Step Act on Truth Out. Check it out. Candice, thanks so much for dropping by.
Thank you, Tom.
Great talking with you. I do appreciate it. We'll be back.